What's up, everybody? This is the Booch, and welcome to episode 37 of the Boochcast reviews Darkside of the Ring. And I'm very excited to be back here for this episode. Now, before I commence with the latest episode, I do have to mention something at the beginning, because if I don't mention this, you're not going to listen to a word I say for the duration of this video. As you know, last week, I did the tragic fall of Adrian Adonis. And as you know, I had a big old bushy beard during that episode. In fact, you'll notice throughout most of these, some things are out of order. I've been clean shaven. I've had a full beard. There's some episodes coming out where I've had a goatee. So I've pretty much been going through the facial hair changes. That's because a lot of these videos have been done out of order and stuff. They're coming out in order, but a lot of things have changed. Like last week, I had a big old beard because at the time I was growing out the beard at the request of a friend of mine that I was working with. I'll say who it is. Goth Batty. She wanted me to grow out a beard. So I recorded that during the time while Goth Batty and I were working together. But then after she and I had the falling out, I decided to shave the beard off because I had no reason to keep it. Although I did keep a goatee for a while. That's why you see in a few other ones, I had the goatee running. But then when I started working at UPS, I shaved the goatee off because I wanted to be clean shaven when I first came in, because I like to look job interview presentable. Plus, I prefer being clean shaven. I know some people think I look better with facial hair, but clean shaven is just easier for me. It's easier for me to work with, and it's just what I prefer. So I decided to go back to doing the clean shaven. Now, you'll see a goatee in the next few episodes coming out, but going forward, I'm hoping to keep a clean shaven face, unless I need to grow out facial hair for a specific reason. But that being said, I am here today for episode 37, which is Abdullah the Butcher, Legacy of Blood. And this is obviously a crazy episode, a very controversial episode. I know originally I was hoping Gator would join me for this episode, but sadly, that's not going to happen. Although with the new Darkside of the Ring season coming out soon, I know that there's a few episodes he wants to join me for that. But we'll see what happens if he's able to actually show up. But with that said, we're going to get this started. Now, at the start of this episode, there is a warning. They put up a disclaimer at the beginning. So in the spirit of that, I will give the same disclaimer. Warning: the following program contains dangerous acts performed by professionals. Do not try this at home. That is imperative. Do not try this at home. Now, obviously, most of the people that are watching these videos, we know not to try this at home, unless you're somebody that's aspiring to be a wrestler. But they tell you, don't try this at home, especially if you got kids and stuff. They should not be trying any of this. But mostly because this is a legacy of blood. And Abdullah the Butcher was well known for being excessively bloody, both with himself and with his opponents. So that's why they're telling you dangerous acts performed by professionals. They do not want anyone to try to emulate Abdullah the Butcher. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people in AEW that didn't see this episode and probably fucking need to, but I'm not going to get into that today. One of the most infamous wrestlers of all time, Abdullah the Butcher left a legacy of violence and bloodshed wherever he went, from Puerto Rico to Japan and across North America. Notorious for blurring the line between reality and fiction, Abdullah remained a mystery even to those closest to him. In a gruesome but successful career spanning 7 decades, Abdullah's thirst for blood made him infamous, but also led to his downfall. Hannibal said Abdullah cost him his wrestling career, and that he's a piece of shit, and he hopes he dies a slow and painful death, which is funny considering a lot of people feel that way about Hannibal. Abdullah was so vicious that when he got in the ring, fans cheered for the babyface to survive. He wore Taekwondo karate pants, and he used a fork as his weapon of choice. He put fear into your heart, body, brain, and soul. And that right there, ladies and gentlemen, is the key to being a successful heel, which obviously Abdullah was. You know, you cheered for the babyface to survive. And that is the key component of being a heel, is to get the babyface over. That is your job as a heel. If you're going to work as a heel, if you're going to be a heel, there's more to being a heel than just saying whatever you want and doing whatever you want and being an asshole. You also have to get the baby face over, because the baby face is supposed to be cheered. You as the heel are supposed to be booed, a lost art form that people are forgetting. I don't care how great of a heel you are. I don't care how much you insult the fans or insult your opponent or be degrading or cheat or whatever. If the audience is cheering you, you are failing as a heel. You suck as a heel if the fans are popping and cheering for what you do. If they're rooting for you to do bad things, you suck as a heel. Or the fans are fucking deplorable. That's the only two logical explanations if a heel is being cheered. Either the heel sucks at his job or the fans are pieces of shit human beings. They're vile and disgusting. It's one of the two. So if the fans aren't pieces of shit, the heel sucks. If the heel doesn't suck, that means the fans are pieces of shit. Because you should not cheer for a bad person to do bad things. Now, you can admire the heel for doing their job properly. Like as an analyst, that's what I do. But as a fan in the stands, the heel should not be doing things that make you cheer. The heel should be doing things that make you boo. And that's what made Abdullah a great heel. He got the babyface over by being a vile, disgusting human being. He would eat raw meat and liver. He would let the blood drip from the liver while he chewed on it. So again, Abdullah showing that he is a psycho, a wild animal, a vicious human being. They grew up in Windsor and lived in a 2-bedroom house with 8 people in it. His brother Ralph slept in the bathtub and 3 of the kids slept in a bed together. So Abdullah lived in a very small house growing up. Abdullah's real name is Larry Shreve. That's his shoot name, his Christian name, as Gator would say. And he's from Khartoum, Sudan, Windsor, Ontario. Jesus Christ, that's a mouthful. Parents worked hard to take care of him and his siblings. His mother scrubbed floors at the funeral home. He worried so much about his parents, he didn't want to learn to read or write. He wanted to make money. He would steal candy and sell it at school for a penny apiece. Kids got scared of him, so he left school to run a secondhand store. So basically, he just wanted to make money. He didn't care about reading and writing. Now, most kids don't really care about reading and writing, and most people just want to make money. But unfortunately, knowing how to read and write is essential to making money, because you can't cut a deal with somebody unless you got brains. Because eventually, the more money you make, contracts are eventually going to come into your life. And if you're not able to read a contract and sign your name properly, you can easily get fucked over. So his mindset of he wants to make money, and school's usually boring, but reading and writing is something you definitely have to learn. Like obviously in the public school system, there's a lot of shit they teach you that you don't really need to fucking learn. And even in college, they force you to take electives, which most of the time you don't need for your actual major or what you're going for. But reading and writing are still important things to learn in school. Those are the one aspects of school that you actually do need to learn. He also shined shoes and worked as a janitor. He also taught old ladies self-defense because he was a martial artist. So obviously the Taekwondo pants fit the gimmick because he did know martial arts and was a legit martial artist and knew how to fight. The manager of the place where he trained the old lady says, "You should be a wrestler." He said, "I don't want to do that crap." He said, "You can make some money." So Larry says, "Oh, okay." And unfortunately, as much as fans probably don't want to hear this, that was a motivating factor for people to get into the business, is to make money. So that's why it's hilarious to hear people talk about, this guy only does it for the money. This guy only cares about the money. I said this before and I'll say it again, ladies and gentlemen. Every wrestler cares about the money. Do not fucking fool yourself into thinking there are people out there that don't care about the money. Because in the immortal words of Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner, anybody in the business that doesn't care about the money is a mark. Any wrestler that tells you, I don't do this for the money, they're a fucking mark. Simple as that. Everyone cares about the money. And that's not a bad thing. The money should be important to you. Because if the money's not important to you, you're not going to care how much you make. And what people don't understand is the more money you make in wrestling, the more time you can devote to the wrestling. So you don't have to get a day job to pay your bills. And there are some people on the indie scene that do work day jobs and wrestle on the weekends, and I don't begrudge those people. I respect that. Do your hustle. Do what you got to do. But your goal should be to make enough money in wrestling that you don't have to work a day job. Hell, that's my goal with comedy, was to make enough money that I didn't have to work a day job. And there was a period of time where I didn't need a day job. Obviously, I got one now. And just to verify for people, it's not UPS. That lasted about a month. I'm in the process of getting a job somewhere else at the time that I'm recording this. So stay tuned to the podcast and you'll find out what that new job is. I'm not going to say it here, but that was my goal. And for a period of time, I was able to make money just doing what I do. But if I could make money just doing all of this stuff, I wouldn't need a day job, but that's the goal, to make enough money in wrestling that you don't need a day job. You can devote all your time to what you're doing. That's also why I'm hoping to monetize my YouTube channels, this one and my personal one. So please like, comment, subscribe. Abdullah crosses the river to Detroit, where he meets the original Sheik, one of the innovators of hardcore wrestling. He would cut your forehead and walk around all crazy. Abdullah emulated the Sheik because the Sheik did train him, so he did become a different version of the Sheik and wanted to be like him. And obviously, the innovators of hardcore wrestling and the cutting of the forehead. And here's the thing, and you hear people a lot talk about hardcore wrestling and deathmatch wrestling and all that. In the proper context, hardcore matches are great. In fact, I prefer hardcore matches over death matches because at least hardcore matches have psychology and storytelling. Death matches, for the most part, do not. Although I do know a couple of people that put psychology and storytelling into their death matches, and they're the only death match people I want to see. The rest of them can suck it. But, if built up properly and you have enough of a feud, enough of a rivalry that's so personal, it has to be violent and bloody, then I want to see it. But if you're just throwing it out there just to throw it out there for no reason or rhyme, then I don't want to fucking see it. And neither would anybody else. His parents saw him bleeding in the ring and felt he needed to get out of the business. He then explained to his dad the concept of blading, and he gave his blessing. So he explained to him that the reason he's bleeding is because he's cutting himself, or as they say in the business, gigging himself. And by doing that, you cause the bleeding. So a guy hits you and you pull out the blade and you secretly cut yourself, and then the guy hits you a little bit more to open it up, and that's where the blood starts flowing. And that was how people bled back in the day. Now, in WWE today, you see bleeding, but it's mostly busted open hard way because they don't allow blading anymore, or at least they didn't under Vince. I don't know if Triple H is going to allow blading or not, if TKO is going to be okay with it. I have no idea. We'll all find out together in the future. So we'll see what happens. But back in the day, that's what wrestlers did. Now, originally, Gator was supposed to put out a blading tutorial video for the Boochcast YouTube channel. But of course, he kept flaking like he always does, and eventually was never able to capitalize on it. Hell, he owed us a Vince Russo praising video for a Survivor Series bet, and he didn't capitalize on that either. Having learned this bloody trick of the trade, Abdullah travels the world, showcasing his hardcore style. While working in Puerto Rico, he meets promoter Carlos Colon and his right-hand man, Hugo Savinovich. Hugo wasn't big enough to be a wrestler, so Carlos made him a manager and gave him Abdullah as a client. He went to Puerto Rico, Japan, and the States and drew money everywhere. And unfortunately, that is something that happens in the business, where if you're not big enough to be a wrestler, they make you a manager, because a manager is not supposed to be as big as a wrestler as far as height and size. Like, you can be as popular as a wrestler, but usually if you got a different size but you have a personality, they can make you a manager. I've done my fair share of managing in the business. I've done my fair share of commentating and announcing because I have the perfect physique for that. Obviously, I'm not big enough to be a wrestler, and although I thought about being a wrestler, but being a manager is just as good, and being a commentator's announcer is twice as good because you still get paid to be part of it if you work for the right people. And plus, Abdullah's character was so wild and out of control that I believe it made sense for him to have a manager. Let the manager do the talking, and you just go out there and just be a wild, reckless animal. He also made a ton of money and gave portions of it to his family. He went to the funeral home, got her out of there, and she never worked another day in her life. Which obviously is a great thing for a child to do for their parent. If you can make enough money to where your mom doesn't have to work anymore, that's a great feeling. Especially since the mom is busting her ass to take care of him and all his siblings. Like, now I can take care of mom. You're not going to work in this funeral home anymore. And that's great. She never had to work another day in her life because Abdullah made enough money and sent portions of it to his family, kept others for himself, to take care of all of his things and his lifestyle. But, taking care of family is important. I know that as an Italian. Despite his successful and profitable rise to fame, Abdullah today finds himself in legal trouble and financial ruin. He moved very well for a big man and knew how to work the crowd and scare them. He protected his character to the point of even making flight attendants uncomfortable. uncomfortable. And that to me is a little iffy. Like obviously back then, airport security and airplanes were not as uptight as they are today. Like I do believe in protecting kayfabe, obviously. But I also believe there is a time and there is a place. And I don't think the airport or an airplane is where you want to do that. When you're on the flight, just get on the flight, sit on the plane and just be a passenger, because you don't want to make people on a flight uncomfortable, because then you run the chance of getting arrested and taken off the plane. Hell, even luchadors aren't even allowed to wear their masks on a plane. So there is a time and a place for kayfabe, and sometimes you do have to break it. And I do think the airport is the one place where kayfabe should be broken. So you don't risk missing a show because you get taken off a fucking airplane because you just wanted to keep kayfabe. And obviously the financial ruin, we're going to get to that a little bit later. He was so feared and hated that if you fought him, you got over instantly, especially if you went over. So it was very easy for him to get baby faces over because you were seen as brave just for stepping into the ring with this fucking psycho, because that's how crazy his gimmick was. And again, it's a testament to how great of a heel Abdullah the Butcher truly was. Like people can say whatever they want about his in-ring style, or the fact that he was heavily overweight or whatever, but he had the ability to be a heel and be an effective one. And he got over in Japan because it was 70% real. The 30% that wasn't was the finish. And that's some crazy shit in Japan. Like they had a finish, they knew who was going over. But everything before that was pretty much real. You were fighting for your life in Japan. Japan, you couldn't bullshit up there. Japan, you had to know how to wrestle, you had to know how to fight, you had to know moves. Japan was serious back then. Obviously today, Japanese wrestling for the most part is considered a joke, but back then it was taken very seriously. Like that's why one of the things people always say is if you don't think Hulk Hogan can wrestle, go watch his matches in Japan. He knew how to wrestle. He didn't do that shit in America because he didn't need to. Not everybody needs to be a man of 1,000 holds to get over. Some people can get over with just the little moves they got, and they get a louder pop than the guy that does all the tumbling shit. He appeared in the movie Roaring Fire. He recorded an album in the locker room, Apu and Best Bout boxing video games. I don't know what the Apu means, but he did appear in a lot of video games and, record albums and stuff. He was very popular. Having found success with the hardcore style he adapted from the Sheik, Abdullah becomes a mentor to wrestler Devin Nicholson. But this long-term friendship will end in disaster. Now, for y'all that don't know, Devin Nicholson is the shoot name or the Christian name of Hannibal, who runs a YouTube channel where he does interviews and wrestles matches and does a lot of other shit. Starting his career with Stampede Wrestling in 2001, Devin begins working under the name Madman Hannibal and soon launches his own indie promotion, Great North Wrestling. In 2006, he begins working with Abdullah. Abdullah taught him the business and how to get heat. They tag teamed and wrestled each other. Hannibal doesn't care if people hate him for ending his career. Well, Hannibal, I think people hate you for a lot of reasons. Ending Abdullah's career is not one of them. I promise you, it's not one of them. But we're going to get to the reason, Hannibal, why people hate you in a second. Already 68 years old and 6 decades into his career, Abdullah returns to Canada to wrestle Hannibal in what's being billed as his retirement match. Hannibal first saw Abdullah in a video called I Like to Hurt People. His grandma was a huge wrestling fan and showed it to him. The blood intrigued him because he didn't know about blading during that time. So again, this is another guy in the wrestling business that is drawn to the blood. That's why he calls himself the Blood Hunter. And I'm going to say this about wrestling. If the blood is what intrigues you to get into the business, I think you're mentally ill and you need your head examined. The blood should not be a motivating factor for you to get into the business just so you can bleed. You should get into the business because you love the business and because you want to make money and you want to draw money and you want to be successful. But if you just care about bleeding, you're fucked in the head to me. When Abdullah would blade, you wouldn't actually see him do it. The blood would appear like magic. He had razors on his fingers. First, he would gig you with the blade and then use the fork to make it worse. So it looked like the fork did all the work. He would stab you with the fork. He would cut them deep. People didn't bitch and complain because it wasn't tolerated back then. You sucked it up. Back then, you didn't bitch and complain about being gigged or the pain or whatever else. Because if you were bitching and complaining a lot, you were seen as difficult to work with or not strong enough to be in the business. You sucked it up, you dealt with it, you paid your dues. especially if you work with Abdullah. If you work a match with Abdullah the Butcher, you know you're going to bleed. If you walk into that match not expecting to be gigged, you're a fucking idiot. The blade fit his gimmick as the Butcher. Ric Flair had the robe, Abdullah had the blade. But again, he would use the blade and then the fork would make it look worse. Because obviously with a fork, unless you sharpen that sumbitch, it's hard to get somebody to bleed with a fork. I'm not saying it isn't doable. I'm just saying it's a lot difficult. It's a lot of stabbing involved. It takes a lot of work. So gigging someone with the blade and then using the fork to make it worse is a lot better. It's a lot better of a system. Abdullah's intense bloodlust and unpredictable style keeps him from signing with the world's largest promotion, Vince McMahon's WWE. Because again, WWE was not big on excessive blood. Obviously, there were some cases where blood did happen, but it was rare, especially before the Attitude Era. Now, obviously, in the Attitude Era, there was quite a lot of bleeding, but it wasn't to the point of being bloodthirsty. It was just something that happened, or it was warranted to help build a major story, or certain matches had it to up the ante, but you didn't have blood every match. With Hannibal, you had to have blood every match. It was literally part of his gimmick. So obviously Vince was not going to sign him. Even if he did sign him, he would be a rare attraction. In Ottawa, Abdullah and Hannibal make an appearance on Rogers Daytime. The male host gets put in a headlock and he walks him over to the table, puts food in his face, breaks a plate on his head, and he starts bleeding. Hannibal picks up the girl and carries her off stage. The guy is in shock, but nothing bad happened afterwards and helped sell tickets to the show. So the guy was obviously caught off guard, but he didn't press charges. And I like to think it's because maybe they knew in advance what was going to happen, or they didn't know in advance what was going to happen. The guy knew enough about Abdullah that blood was going to be involved. But either way, it helped sell tickets. It got people's attention. And again, that is the name of the game in wrestling, is to draw money and sell tickets. That's the end all be all. Nobody pays to see you. Doesn't matter how great you are. Again, you can be a man of 1,000 holds. You can do all the tumbling acts you want. But if you can't draw money, you're useless. You serve two purposes in professional wrestling. You're either the guy who sells the tickets or you're the guy who helps to sell the tickets. If you're not doing one of those two things, nobody's going to book you. Again, no matter how great you are. And even if you get booked, at best, you're going to be the opening match. And you're not going to get paid a whole lot of money because you hold no bearing on the ticket sales. So you can't expect a huge payday unless you're a big name that's going to sell tickets. After years on the independent circuit and mentorship from Abdullah, Hannibal finally reaches his own opportunity to wrestle for the WWE. Abdullah was proud of him, but after a series of routine blood tests, Hannibal received career-shattering news. They found that he had hepatitis C. Back in the day, wrestlers borrowed blades a lot of the time, so Abdullah could very well have gotten it from another wrestler. Hannibal knew Abdullah was the cause because he didn't know anyone else that could have given it to him. So he's convinced that Hannibal's the one that gave him hepatitis. His career cut short by his hepatitis C diagnosis, Hannibal is desperate for answers. The guy who was filming his documentary saw a clip from a match in 2007 where Abdullah cut himself with the blade and then used the same blade on Hannibal. A lawyer named Ronald Kaza saw the case and forced Hannibal to provide his blood test. He had a history of having hepatitis C, but even he didn't know common sense would tell you not to cut someone with a razor blade that had blood on it. And that's true. You should not gig somebody with the same blade you use on yourself, because that's mixing the blood together. Or as a superstar Billy Graham would say, the co-mingling of blood. That's why it always looks weird if two people in a match are bleeding at the same time. Like if one person's bleeding, that's easy. But if both people are bleeding, that's a recipe for disaster in a match. But even still, you should not cut yourself with one blade and cut the other person with the same blade. That's just fucking sick. The footage of Abdullah cutting Hannibal with a used razor blade and the results of Abdullah's blood test form the basis of a lawsuit filed by Hannibal. A lawsuit that Abdullah claims he couldn't read or understand. So again, this is where Abdullah not caring about reading and writing falls into play. If he had taken the time to learn to read and write, even while he was out there hustling and making money, he would have been able to understand this lawsuit and maybe could have found a way to fight it and possibly win. But because he couldn't read or understand it, he was at a disadvantage. His caregiver, Malika, read the letter, and Abdullah broke down in tears. His sister called to tell him he lost the case due to default because he failed to appear in court. That's another issue. If you fail to appear in court, you lose the case by default. That happens. You know, there are certain people that go to court over cases, the other person doesn't show up, so the judge says, you're free to go. Simple as that. He was found guilty of negligence, assault, and battery. Court documents show that Abdullah carries the same rare strain of hepatitis C as Hannibal. In the years that follow, Abdullah makes a range of claims, including the allegation that it was Hannibal who gave the disease to him. So now he's saying Hannibal gave him hepatitis C. After the Canadian judge sees the video evidence, coupled with the confirmation that both men share the same rare strain of hepatitis C, The courts side with Hannibal. He was awarded $2.3 million in damages. So Hannibal ultimately wins the case. And obviously there's a lot of people who are siding with Hannibal in this because, Abdullah was known for being reckless. However, my question is this. Was Abdullah aware that he had hepatitis C when he gave it to Hannibal? Now, obviously, the test shows that he had it, but I don't know for sure if Hannibal knew that. Because here's how I feel. If you're not aware that you have a disease, whether it be hepatitis C or a sexually transmitted disease or even something major like HIV and AIDS or anything like that, if you're not aware that you have it and you give it to somebody, then I can understand, not being at fault for that. Like if you're not aware of it, obviously it's not your fault because you're not intentionally giving it to someone. But if you know you have hepatitis C, if you know you have a sexually transmitted disease, if you know you have AIDS or HIV, and you still have sex with someone or cut yourself with a blade and then cut them with the same blade, if you do anything blood related with someone, knowing you have a blood disease, then you are a piece of shit. So that's the question that I would want to know. Did Abdullah know for a fact, 100%, that he had hepatitis C before he had that match with Hannibal? Because if he did, fuck him. And by that I mean Abdullah. If he didn't, then I can feel a little bit bad for Abdullah in this situation. Not that Hannibal didn't deserve to win the case, but I can feel a little sad for Abdullah here. In dire financial straits, Abdullah continues to make wrestling-related appearances and autograph signings. Hannibal claims that Abdullah has moved around his assets in order to avoid paying him, and to this day, the matter is still in front of the courts. So Hannibal is claiming that Abdullah is trying to avoid paying him. Abdullah saying he can't afford it. Hannibal saying he can. Obviously, in this case, I don't know who to believe. I do know that there are some people in the wrestling business that claim they don't have money, but really they do, or they hide it or whatever. There are people in the wrestling business that do scam other people. The dirty part of the wrestling business, unfortunately. So I can't say that Hannibal's lying about that. I do know that Abdullah does owe him money, according to the courts. Abdullah wishes he had gone to school to learn how to read and write, as I mentioned before. He studied money, but he needed more than that, as I mentioned before. Hannibal claims he could and has seen him ordering food off menus and has signed autographs. People close to him are shocked to learn that he can't read or write and hasn't gone past second grade. So again, we don't know what's the truth and what isn't. Now, Hannibal claims he's seen him order food off menus or sign autographs. I don't know how Abdullah signs his autographs. I haven't gotten an autograph from Abdullah the Butcher. But I do know that, after a certain point, you can get used to doing things a certain way. Or maybe he at least learned to sign his name but can't write anything else. Like maybe he learned to sign his name and that's the extent. Or, if he ordered food off a menu, maybe it's a menu he memorized. If you memorize something long enough or have something read to you long enough, it's easier to recite it. So there are ways to work around certain things if he doesn't know how to read and write. The punishing style of hardcore wrestling has a long legacy, but often comes at great personal cost for those involved. They were invincible and they made you feel like you were invincible. The people wanted violence, and if you didn't give it to them, they didn't come to see you. And that's the price you pay for having a hardcore style gimmick. Is people expect you to be that guy all the time. That's why I've always said the people that last long in this business are the people that use psychology and storytelling and can use a limited move set to still get over with the crowd. Those people are able to wrestle well into their 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever, because they know how to get the crowd going by doing less. They can get, less is more. When you're a hardcore guy or you're an acrobatic high flyer, once you can't do those things anymore, you've outlived your usefulness. You can't adapt to a different style because you've been so obsessed with this style that you're using. In a twist of fate in 2021, 7 years after his own court battle, Hannibal finds himself at the center of his own controversy by brutalizing a referee. They were looking for a spiked blood spot, and the ref was a known bleeder. There were no medics on site. The ref got an infection. So either he's a nutcase or he is sloppy and reckless. He claims there was bad communication. Now, here's the part where I'm going to jump in here and say Hannibal's a fucking hypocrite regardless of the reason. Whether he's a nutcase, whether he's sloppy and reckless, or if there was bad communication. Either way, if you are suing somebody over a blood-related incident and you go out there and cut somebody recklessly, it kills whatever credibility you had in the courtroom. And Hannibal is notorious for being sloppy and reckless with blood and for being an unlikable piece of shit. Like apparently he works shows for free and just to videotape himself and is very much a mark in the business. I personally don't like him because of the shit that he said about Buff. without knowing the full story about what Buff is going through and just being a judgmental prick. So I have my issues with Hannibal on why I don't fucking like him. Although I will admit, as much as I don't like him as a person, there are some of his YouTube videos that I've seen that I enjoyed, mostly the ones that revolve around Al Snow. Because he's done interviews with Al Snow, and also he's shown Al Snow doing training seminars and giving people advice on the business. And Al Snow is truly a wrestling expert. A lot of the stuff that I learned about the business, I learned from watching those Al Snow Hannibal videos. So I will give props to Hannibal for that. And I have met Al Snow in person. I met him a few years back at a wrestling show in Tennessee that was being run by Ricky Morton's school. And I told Al Snow to his face that I learned a lot about the business from him. And I have studied other wrestling minds as well, like Jim Cornette, Bruce Pritchard, Dutch Mantel, and dare I even say Russo. I've learned a lot about the business from studying it. Also, I work in the business as an announcer, a commentator, and a manager. I've done a lot in the business, so I learned it from that. But even before I got in the business, I still studied it. I've read books. I've watched wrestling. I've analyzed it. I know how to study wrestling and break it down, which is why I have this YouTube channel and why a lot of you guys listen to me. There's a reason why I have a fan base in the podcast world of wrestling, because you guys know I know my shit. You might not agree with everything that I say. You might disagree with me here and there, but you at least know that I know my shit and that I have a standard that I hold every wrestling promotion to. Yeah, I talk a lot of shit about AEW, but I also talk shit about WWE and even NXT, which is my favorite, when they do fucked up shit. You know, I don't just overlook it and only blame AEW. It's just AEW happens to do a lot of fucked up shit that I don't like. That's why I mostly bash them. But AEW has also done some good, and I acknowledge the good when it's there. You know, WWE does a lot of fucked up shit too, but not as often. To this day, Abdullah's legal problems haunt him, and the hepatitis C controversy has tainted the legacy of his legendary career. So, you know, a lot of people look at Abdullah in a negative light because of that. Hannibal eventually finds an experimental treatment that cures him of his hepatitis C, but his bitterness remains. He says the only way Abdullah could make this right is pay him what he owes him and take responsibility for what he did. Now, despite all the stuff that I said about Hannibal earlier and not really like him as a person, I will say that I'm glad that he's cured of his hepatitis C, because I don't hate him to the point where I want him to be infected by something and die. I do think, however, he's a douchebag and does need to take responsibility for what he did in cutting up that referee. Because the lawsuit is argued in a civil trial, the judge found Abdullah the Butcher liable, but not guilty of causing Hannibal's hepatitis C. So basically he's saying that he didn't cause the hepatitis C, but he is liable for the damage, which I don't understand that point at all. That's fucking confusing. He's liable, but not guilty of causing the hepatitis C. How the fuck does that work? I don't understand how you can have both. That doesn't make sense. In 2011, Abdullah the Butcher was inducted into the WWE's Hall of Fame. He was inducted by Terry Funk, who put him over strong. He said, whatever people say about Abdullah the Butcher, he made those promoters a lot of money. And again, that is the bottom line in professional wrestling. If you can make promoters a lot of money, they will book you. Obviously, Vince McMahon is the exception to the rule. But then again, in defense of Vince McMahon on that, he didn't really need Abdullah to make him a lot of money. He already had stars that were making him plenty of money. But the smaller promotions who weren't making as much money as Vince McMahon, they made a lot of money working with Abdullah the Butcher. And I actually remember that Hall of Fame in 2011 because that was the first and so far the only Hall of Fame induction ceremony I ever attended, because it was here in Atlanta during that WrestleMania weekend. So I went to everything that weekend. I went to WrestleMania Access. I went to the Hall of Fame. I went to WrestleMania itself. And then I went to Raw the next night, where they announced Cena versus The Rock for Miami. And in addition to that, there were other people inducted into the Hall of Fame that year. Of course, the headliner was Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid, who was inducted by Triple H. And of course, you know, Shawn Michaels, I got to interview him on the Regular Guy show. We all talked and hung out there. So it was a great moment. Hacksaw Jim Duggan went in that year. He was inducted by Ted DiBiase, which after learning about Duggan and DiBiase's history hanging out with Matt Bourne, it makes sense that DiBiase would induct Jim Duggan. We had Bullet Bob Armstrong, was inducted in the Hall of Fame by Scott, Brad, and Brian Armstrong, who, of course, Scott Armstrong is a well-known referee in the business. Brad Armstrong, if you remember from the Super Bowl III classic pay-per-view review that came out a few weeks back, Brad Armstrong was in that. And of course, Brian Armstrong, who we all know as the Road Dogg Jesse James. Brad Armstrong is his shoot name or Christian name, so he got to induct him as well. And then, of course, also Sunny, Tammy Sitch, she was inducted into the Hall of Fame as well, and the WWE Divas all got together and inducted her. And of course, if you want to know more about Sunny and her career, you can go back and watch the Chris and Tammy episode of Darkside of the Ring if you haven't already. So feel free to check that out in addition to this episode if you want to learn more about Tammy. And of course, the Road Warriors were also inducted, and they were inducted by the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, baby. And of course, you can check out the last ride of the Road Warriors if you want to learn more about the Road Warriors history, and that's also on the Dark Side of the Ring. If you check out the playlist, which there should be a link in the corner up here somewhere, it'll take you to both those episodes. You can check out both of them. And of course, the celebrity inductee was Drew Carey, who got inducted by Kane because they had that altercation in the Rumble. Now, obviously, I'm not one of those people that hates celebrity inductions, depending on the celebrity, whether or not they deserve an induction. And I am a fan of Drew Carey. I like this sitcom. I like them on Whose Lines It Anyway. I don't really watch The Price is Right, but I don't think Drew Carey deserved a celebrity induction. I don't. Like I said, there were other celebrities that definitely deserved it, but I don't think Drew Carey did enough in WWE to really warrant a celebrity induction. I'm sorry, but I don't. Abdullah the Butcher is remembered for being feared by the fans and making you feel like his opponent was fighting for his life. And I know that was mentioned numerous times in this episode, but that is the legacy of Abdullah the Butcher. Yes, this hepatitis C thing is obviously a big part of it because it's what led to Abdullah not wrestling anymore and nobody really wanting to book him for in-ring wrestling anymore. Like I said, they do book him for autograph signings and things like that. In fact, a few months ago, he was inducted into the Primetime Wrestling Hall of Fame, as was Buff Bagwell and Scott Hudson, who was my mentor in wrestling commentary. So Abdullah does get inductions that way. But ultimately, that's what he did. He was a fantastic heel who used his persona as well as his in-ring psychology to get the babyface over. And it was an amazing feeling. And Abdullah, definitely has a legacy in wrestling that is great. If you're a fan of hardcore styles and death matches and seeing a lot of blood in wrestling, Abdullah the Butcher is someone you want to check out. And if you're one of those wrestlers that loves doing the death match shit, who loves doing the hardcore shit, who loves to bleed, then Abdullah the Butcher is someone you owe a debt of gratitude for because he definitely was one of those guys that paved the way for that style of wrestling. I mean, obviously the Sheik was another one, but Abdullah definitely took it to another level that even the Sheik didn't take it to. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will wrap up this episode of Boochcast Reviews Darkside of the Ring. I thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure you tune in next week. We're going to have a really great episode. I'll be joined by the Broke Soulless Ginger, Mr. Zach Scott, and we will be talking about Bam Bam Bigelow, the Beast from the East. That'll be taking place next week here on the Boochcast YouTube channel. So make sure you guys follow us on all of our podcast platforms. The link is down in the description box below. Make sure you follow us on our social media platforms. That link will be in the description box below. You can also support the Boochcast by going to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/the Boochcast/support. That link will be down in the description box below. And of course, as always, hit the subscribe button and ring that bell to be notified so you never miss another episode of Boochcast Reviews Darkside of the Ring, as well as other additional Boochcast YouTube content. We'll talk to you guys next time. Until then, pizza, baby!